I am pleased to welcome on stage Matt O, who is going to be talking about the return of the kernel Rootkit malware on Windows. And he is in our WDATP team here at Microsoft, focusing on exploit and malware analysis. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so let's talk about some Windows Rootkit malware. Doesn't update, actually.
You'll have to use your space bar because you're not connected.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it takes some time. So, yeah, she introduced me, but I can briefly talk about myself to understand how we are researching these kind of threats, actually. So I work for Microsoft WDATP team. So WDATP is EDR, an EDR system made by Microsoft, actually. So we are more a blue team, and I have very special interest in new exploit and malware techniques. And I'm more a reverse engineer, so I'm more like tearing down existing exploits or malware and to learn from their techniques. And we can use it for better defense, actually. And I was previously one-day researcher. So Darangrim is a kind of like open source binary diffing tool. So Rootkit. You guys should probably remember this book. This is a kind of really legendary legacy book about Windows Rootkit. And this is the reference for Windows Rootkit. And many techniques that were described in this book actually were used by real-world malware, actually. So for example, DCOM was really popular with multiple malware, and SSDT hooks, all these things are really very, very common around 2000 and until mid-2000. So all this scene actually changed when Windows introduced driver signing requirement on Windows Vista. And the other thing is that Windows by default had this patchguard. Internal name is actual official name is kernel patch protection. This one actually goes through these memory locations for any modifications, all these things, and they will kernel panic if something not normal is detected. So now malware authors are facing new challenges, right? So they need to have valid certificate to sign their drivers. So for last almost 10 years, actually, we only saw very advanced threats actually using these kernel drivers and rootkit techniques. For example, equation and Duku2, in most cases, they stole some valid certificate from other companies, actually. So in June of 2018, actually, there was a very interesting report came out from Bitdefender, and with weird name, Jacino or Jacino, I don't know, but it's an ad fraud operation. So the report looked very like a normal until it mentioned the digitally signed rootkit. Actually, it's very interesting. So, and this is an ad fraud operation. Ad fraud, it means that it actually runs some browser in the background, and it will click some adware or ad links. And in that way, they make small money on the, from that machine. So this is kind of very awkward situation when they are just using this high-end technique for this ad fraud operation. So anyway, Microsoft detection is Detrahere. So I'm going to use Detrahere as a kind of name here, actually. So the report from Bitdefender, they focused on this adware or ad fraud aspect. But this presentation is more focused on rootkit aspect of this malware toolkit. So one thing that we can notice is Detrahere was really under the radar for a long time, actually. So if you look at the virus total intelligence record, actually, so the first file submitted is like 2017 September. And at the time, there was only one vendor actually detected it. It was Malware. And somehow it identified it correct, actually, as a Rootkit agent. But almost for next 10 months, or 9 or 10 months, there were only 6 detections out of 67 vendors. And those detections were not even specific enough. They were kind of very suspicious about this file, but the detections were not really very specific. So just after Bitdefender released this report, the detection rate went up. So what does it mean? It means that this threat was really sneaky for a long time, actually. So if you want 2 words to describe this threat, there are 2 words, right? Stealthiness and persistency. So this whole presentation will talk about how they are stealthy and how they are persistent. And there are 3 aspects that makes it stealthy and persistent. So first, it infects other binaries to deliver itself. So it will never be delivered itself as a kind of single binary. So it always carries other binaries, and whenever user opens that file acts as like other third-party programs or original programs. And the other thing is that it installs a kernel driver that will hide other components. So the exposure to user is really minimal, and there are low chances that the security products have access to the actual file content, actually. So I will talk about that more later. And it also registered it as a kind of shutdown handler. So this one is actually described well in Bitdefender report. And whenever the system shuts down, if the service is deregistered, it will register it again. So in that way, it will regain the persistence. It's very, very tricky to remove this threat from your machine. So there are multiple components with this threat. I just put the name based upon the functionality and some strings found on these binaries. So driver protect is the main module doing these rootkit operations. So it is doing the shutdown handler registration here. And it has hidden file system. It hides other components from the file system. And it's doing a lot of anti-analysis and debugging operations. So it will detect all these industry security products, and it will just make them not loading or make them defunctional. And the other component is the user mode process, and this module is doing USB file infection. So whenever a new USB drive is inserted, then the files on those drives will be infected too. And the other functionality is actually network traffic injection. And this is the main functionality for ad fraud operations. So whenever it gets some traffic from some interesting programs, actually it will inject its own JavaScript. This one is really well documented with Bitdefender report. So we will not really focus on this. And the other one is a CNC operation. It will connect to some CNC servers. The other module is Netfilter 2. So this is the core driver that performs network traffic injection. It's more of driver, and it's based upon some commercial products out there. The last component is uDisk Manager. So that is the name they are using internally. And this is more of anti-remediation. So if some tools trying to remove this threat, and this module will involve, and it will just make the interference between this removal process. So let's first talk about infection and propagation phase. So as I talked, actually, so this thread is very interesting because it spreads through USB drive, actually. So I found this just by plugging in my own USB drive. And actually, looking at some logs, actually, it was writing back the existing files. And I was really suspicious the file size increases, all these things. So also WDATP, our product actually had a really good visibility. So if you look at this process tree, this is a process, RTD. This is the random name. So this user mode component has always random names so that they can work around any detections based upon some file names. So this name, this process actually, if you look at that, the dboot memtester, this is a USB drive file, so one of the file. So actually it overwritten this file. So the thing that Bitdefender actually described the initial infection vector as a fake VPN client, but we suspect that maybe this USB infection is one of the reasons how that fake VPN client was infected in the first place. So this is more of speculation. So when this file infection is happening, actually, so the file properties actually change because if we try to infect a notepad, for example, so if you look at the signature, it was originally signed, but it becomes unsigned because they can replicate this certificate information apparently. Also, this machine type, originally it was 64-bit notepad, but they just changed it to 32-bit because it looks like they only have 32-bit installer. So they just use 32-bit as a kind of carrier of this thread. And all other descriptions like a notepad, all these informations are kind of fake. And the original 64-bit binary will be dropped and run from the system. So if you look at the file structure itself, when it is infected, the original file, this MG, this file data, is actually embedded inside the bin data resource section. So they don't even try to hide it. And from the original infector, the original the infector, the original P payload will be searched upon using the game module handle. They will go through this memory space and will find the payload. And we'll save the file as a kind of temporary file on the system. And we'll run drop the file. So it's a very simple operation. And when this happens, actually, when they run this thread that they want administrator privilege, they will prompt you with UAC prompt, actually. So if user clicks yes, then in that case, if you look at this process tree under SVC host, for example, I ran setup.exe, and this file will be just executed as kind of admin. So from the process tree, it's not really obvious what is happening there. So this is how the thread is spreading. So it's not using really complicated technique. It's really simple tactics they're using, just infecting USB drive. So overall, the worldwide, this prevalence of this malware is really low because we suspect that because their propagation tactic or strategy is really weak, actually. So, but the interesting part actually starts from this kernel module. So this one is kind of some information, very interesting, actually. So if you look at the certificate that were used for these drivers, Rootkit drivers, this information, actually, this Hainan City Digital District UK, or this LIK, this signer, this certificate was actually stolen and revoked already. So we might say that, oh, because this certificate was stolen, but it was revoked, so it can't be used, right? So the other very interesting fact is that there is no counter signatures. So counter signatures, we can describe it very easily. So if someone writes some document, and they can fill out anything, any information there, but if you want it more official, you get notarized, right? So it's the same thing as this certificate. So whenever someone writes, signs some files, they can write any information they want, but they want to be notarized if they want to make sure that this information is really true. But there is no counter signature. It means that you can't trust the information saved in this signature. And the other thing is that this certificate is expired, actually. So if you look at the valid from field here, so valid from June 27th, 2013 to June 28th, 2014. So now it is 2018. This malware came like 2017 or something. So this certificate is expired already. So this is a very interesting aspect of Windows, actually, when they're trying to load kernel drivers. There are a lot of different hardware vendors actually shipping some hardwares with really old legacy drivers. So Windows allows some old legacy driver that were signed before some time frame, actually. So everything is documented. I have the link somewhere in this presentation. And the thing is that for these compatibility reasons, if the driver is signed with this past time frame, actually, so Windows just allows you to load this driver. So this one is kind of discussed a lot with the community right now and internally. So the thing is that there are some mitigations you can put, actually, if you are really if you really want to protect against these kind of threats. The first option is actually using Windows 10 S mode. So for S mode, you can actually, the driver packages are has more restrictions. Those drivers should be signed by Windows or WQL, all these signers. They have restricted sets of signers. But for this threat, the signer was kind of random, some company located in China. And the other way, actually, you can achieve the mitigation is actually using Windows Defender Application Control Policy, known as device guard before, actually. So using customized policy, actually, you can specify what kind of driver you want to allow to load on your system. For example, you can specify only WQL certified drivers to be loaded on the systems you are looking at. So that is, those are two mitigations you can put on your system. And the next one is actually, it's not really strict mitigation. It's more of a generic approach to limit rootkit activities on your systems. So it's combining secure boot with HVCI. So now it's called memory integrity. So this one will detect any abnormal memory activities happening inside the kernel, like usually used by some exploits, like allocating some shellcode memory. All these activities will be blocked. And plus VBS, hardware-based security, actually, virtualization-based security. So this is a more generic approach for any anti-rootkit or exploit approach. So from the detection point of view, actually, so this can be a really interesting topic because of this, this hardware compatibility issues, just restricting all these drivers are not really practical, actually. So the next thing we can do is actually detecting these threats as early as possible, so when they come out. So for WD-ATP, for RS5, we have this thing is still going on, but certificate telemetry will be improved to include more thorough data. And combined with machine learning, actually we can find this kind of certificate abuse, like revoked and expired, and a vendor that never signed any kernel drivers before suddenly signing some drivers, then we can detect them very quickly. And the other very interesting thing is that this signing of these kernel drivers are actually happening on the fly on the target system. It's not pre-shipped on the binary. So we see a lot of variants of these attacks, these signed drivers. And this, we suspect this is one tactic they're using. So just changing the content a little bit. For example, like this, they're just changing last maybe 30 bytes. And with the random content, they just change the hash of the file content. And they just generate the unique files every time. So it's very, very tricky to block this thread using some hashes or this technique. So that is one of the ways they are using to evade some simple mitigations. So this is how they are loading the thread. But now that is the technique they are using. But now there are more interesting facts, actually. So it's about persistence, how they are maintaining the persistence. So usually rootkits, they reside in the kernel, and they feel very safe, and they hide everything. So they don't really care about how they will maintain the persistence in many cases. But in this case, actually, this thread is really, really determined to remain on your system. So this is a very simple diagram, how the components are connected. So when the installation phase happens, the infected program actually drops and registers the driver protect module. That is the core component of this rootkit operation. And this one is registered. This is the only component that is persistent on the system. So this is just kernel driver, just persistent on the system. It's very tricky to find that this thing is actually malware, actually, because it has self-protection. So if the system is live, if you try to access this file, you get access denied. I will talk about it more later. The thing is that other components, there can be multiple components. I just described 3 components here. They can download more components. Every component will be saved into this hidden protected file system. So these components will be totally hidden from any security programs. So the way they are achieving the ultimate persistence is actually registering the shutdown handler. So shutdown handler is a kind of just notification hook. So whenever the system shuts down, the kernel wants each drivers to have a chance to save their state or some information. So each driver can register their own handlers. In that way, whenever the system shuts down, they can save some data, right? So this driver, this rootkit, actually registers its own shutdown handler. And whenever the system reboots, it will check whether it is still registered as a kind of driver service. And if it is not, it will register again. So shutdown handler is the last operation that the system will perform. So even though your system is disinfected, when you reboot your system, you are instantly reinfected. So this is the code that actually performs this shutdown handler registration. So this is some diagram that can show how this thing works actually. So this is a driver protect module, and it will call this API from Windows kernel. And shutdown handler registration happens. And whenever shutdown event happens, the notification will be delivered to driver protect the registered routine. But even before the shutdown, maybe some security product tries to uninstall this thread by removing this register key. But if the shutdown happens, this shutdown handler will kick in again and will register this register key again. So that is one way they can achieve. So this thread is at the end of this one system cycle So whenever system shut down, it will register again. So the other way they maintain their persistency is actually changing the group order list. So they make themselves as kind of very early stage of this driver loading order. So they minimize any chances that other security product driver related drivers kick in first. So they just change this registry key, and they just put themselves as kind of earliest driver that can be loaded after some built-in drivers. So the good news is that there are multiple other products out there, but if you are using Windows 10 actually, and the Windows Defender has this Windows Defender offline mode. So if you choose these advanced scans from the settings menu, actually, there is a third option, the Windows Defender offline scan. So if you start with this scanning, so it will go through the file system, and if we find this specific threat, it will guide you through the remediation process. So it will guide you through the reboot process, and with next reboot, it will now reboot into your normal Windows operating system, but more into this Windows RE, WinRE, Windows Recovery Partition, and it will load a WDO component there, and it will remove any threats found on the system. So with system reboot, your system will be very clean. So this is the only reliable way you can remove this threat. So we talked about this persistency and how they are loading these kernels and how they are staying there. And the other aspect is that is anti-analysis and debugging and anti-detections, actually. So they do a lot of things to prevent you from analyzing this threat. So at first, when I got this malware sample, even I had a really hard time just making it work and to see what it was actually doing. So because there are too many techniques, actually, I came up with this diagram, and even this diagram looks really, really complicated. In that way, they are really, really determined to deter any detection or analysis attempt. So I can go through briefly upon each one of these. Like on the top, there are process creation and module loading, driver loading system operations. So whenever security product-related process or some analysis-related tools, for example, WinDebugger or Fiddler, all these tools come up, then they will hook into this process or image load hook, and they will prevent this process come up, actually. So you will be suspicious of what is happening on this system, but kind of everything is kind of silent, so maybe you can try to fix it, but that is how it is doing. And any file access to this protected storage, they have their own file directory that they save their own drivers or files. And that directory will be protected. You can't access those files from user mode component. So any process trying to open the user mode process will get access denied to the target system. So if you try to debug the target process, and even WinDebugger will not work. And the next thing is really critical, because if you want to attach kernel debugger to the target system using virtual machine or something, or even physical connection, then it will detect those connections too, and it will just bug check the system. And any create process or filter driver routines registered on the system by security products, they will be deregistered. So we can go through one by one, actually. Anti-analysis tools, process creation callbacks. This is a very simple technique they are using. They just queue. Whenever they find these patterns from the process names, they will suspend the process and queue the terminate process callback. Also, using this image load callback, whenever they find these process names, they will just put the knob code into their entry point. And those modules will be loaded, but will not perform anything because the entry point is kind of nullified already. Also, any kernel driver that are loaded on the system, like for example, they have this list. A lot of them are from some security product, Hitman Pro. There are Panda or Kaspersky drivers. They will be nullified, just putting the knob code into entry point. So even though they will look normal because they are loaded on the system, but actually the entry point is nullified already, so they are kind of dysfunctional on the system. So that is how they were kind of under the radar for that long time, because they were just disabling all these security products like without their knowledge, because it's really silent operation. They are just disabling these things. So even there is no telemetry for the vendors to verify what is happening on the system. So other aspect is actually anti-detection. So this is a very, very interesting operation they are doing. So actually, they are competing with security product, and they are mimicking security products. So that is the point of what they are doing, actually. They learned a lot from what the security products are doing. So if you go back, this table again, diagram again, all these system operations here and driver protect operation, the process create, notify callback, image load callback, filter driver, process open callbacks, or I don't know about the kernel debugger check, but this enumerating some system components, that's what the security products are actually doing. So they are just adopting this like techniques or tactics from the security product, and they are using it in reverse way. So they are attacking security products using the same way the security products are using. So all the technique around here, most of the techniques are well documented. So they are not even using undocumented features of Windows. So that's how it is very hard to find these threats, because they don't show the anomalies that should be showing this shady rootkit should be showing like 10 years ago. So they are doing like a DCOM or SSDT. It was really obvious at the time. So now, this one is very special because whenever these drivers register any filter driver or process callback, then this rootkit will neutralize those callbacks, just putting the knob code at the start of this shellcode, actually, the callback code. So it means that even though this driver, those security product drivers will think that, oh, everything is intact, their callbacks are registered, status, success, or something, but actually they are not working in the kernel. So they don't even know that their drivers are not working because there is no way for them to verify in like in meta perspective way. So they just don't know what is happening there. So this is one way they are just going under the radar for that long time. And they have extensive list of these security products, like the process names. They have very, very long list, actually. And they have these company names and these certificate-related company names, all these things. And they're doing same thing as like a security bug. They scan the files. So they read the actual files, and they scan through the content with these signatures. Any strings, like it's very like a naive signature system, but they just go through some file header. If these strings found, or they think this file must belong to this security product. So they don't even need to specify every single files from these vendors. So the other aspect they're using for anti-debugging is actually they detect this kernel debugger. This is really annoying because you want a dynamic analysis of these rootkit modules. But if you attach debugger, then your system crashes. Then what can you do? So it's really, really challenging to get the first entry point into this reverse engineering of this threat. And the other hurdle that you can get is actually some rootkit kernel drivers. There are multiple versions of kernel drivers. So some versions are actually packed with VM protect. And this one is really hard to break obfuscation technique. But anyway, if you just run it on the system, it will be just decode itself. But the kernel mitigation doesn't work because it doesn't allocate the new memory. It will just overwrite its own image on the fly. So it will not trigger any security mitigations in the kernel. And the other very interesting fact, actually, so I talked about there is like 3 kernel modules. The first one is driver protect, the main anti-rootkit module. The next one is Netfilter 2, which is doing the network packet injection. The third one is very weird one, a udisk manager. So I was really curious what it is doing. It's a really small module. But this module is just targeting one security product. So it is just interfering with any file writing operation with this file, fixedlist.txt. So if you look at this driver code, there is a fixedlist.txt. So this module is all about this file. So whenever this file is found during the filtering, the file system filtering operation, it will go through some logic. And if it is a writing operation, it will fill the buffer with nulls. So this file content, if you try to put some content there, if you try to write some file content into this specific file name, then it will be always filled with nulls. So it turned out, actually, this file is actually used by the Malwarebyte FARVAR recovery scan tool, FRST scan tool. So it looks like with the previous slide, I talked that Malwarebyte is one of the first vendors who detected this threat, actually. So the only way to recover this system is using this window recovery mode. What is that? New boot system, actually. So it looks like I'm not really familiar with this tool, but it looks like this is one of the tools that can perform this recovery. And I think a fixed list might contain the files that should be removed or recovered. But because this file itself is prevented from written on the system, this whole process is kind of just interfered. So looks like this specific one driver is just targeting just one vendor. So we talked about this anti-analysis, anti-security product, anti-debugging feature. So the next one is hidden file system. So I will go through quickly upon this because it's really obvious. So every files are hidden from the user process through filtering driver. And the files, even though you acquire these files through this forensic analysis, these files are intentionally broken, just like modifying 2 bytes in the P header. But when they are loaded, they will just fix up the P header. And the other very interesting fact is when they load user process, they are not loaded from the user land process. They just inject the process from the kernel process. And they are going through this whole process of reserving internal symbols and allocating process memory and thread memory themselves. It's kind of really hardcore technique they are using. So I suspect that this is how they want to avoid any suspicious detections from security products. So that is just speculation, and this hidden file system, they have this call to is protected files. Whenever some files are under this category, they will just return access denied. So from the user mode perspective, they can't access these modules. And if you look at these two drivers they registered, they are regarded as a kind of non-existent file. The good thing is that some security products like WD-ATP, because they operate in the kernel space, they have clear visibility into the driver loading all these operations. So for the user mode operations, WD-ATP has good visibility. So the last part is actually network traffic injection. This one is the core functionality of this Rootkit, actually. So the thing is that I suspect that they purchased Netfilter 2 module. So there is a company, Netfilter SDK.com. They actually sell these filters. So if you look at this property information, the Netfilter SDK WFP driver, and there is a version number. And based upon their homepage information, web page information, the filtering is fully transparent, and you can change the TCP and UTP package on the fly without redirecting the traffic. So I think this is more of transparent proxy. And the good thing is that, not good thing. So the thing is that what they're doing is you can't put all this logic into the driver, it's too much. So actually the user mode process actually reads the data from the Netfilter 2 driver and using IOCTL, and everything is done inside the user land. So they detect some specific patterns, and they can inject the data on the fly to the stream. And they just write back the data, and the Netfilter 2 will pass the data to NDIS driver. So that is how the injection is done. And we believe that the malware writers have access to the Netfilter 2 driver source code, because the source code is kind of slightly modified and it doesn't match any other driver files that we found in the wild. And the other thing is that they really want to hijack the HTTPS traffic too. They install their own root certificate. So from WD-ATP, you can see that actually it modified the root certificate storage. And the conclusion, actually. So this threat, Detrahere or Jacquino, is a threat that intercepts network traffic on a machine to inject ads. So that is the core effect. But it has multiple self-protection mechanisms, like hidden file system, anti-analysis, anti-debugging, anti-security, anti-recovery, actually, right? So there are multiple very customized anti-security products or anti-analyst features. And the other thing is that it abuses features in Windows driver verification process. And they can also use stolen and revoked certificate. Before, it was only stolen certificates they could use. So even though they are revoked, they can still use. So there is a difference. And WD-ATP has really good visibility into these activities. So your security product should run inside the kernel, not on the user land, because user land always can be deceived by this Rootkit threat. And we are seeing more and more Rootkits are appearing using similar technique. And WDO can be used to fully remediate these kind of threats. And that's it. And there are CNC servers, IOCs, and I think this slide will be shared later, I guess. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. So we have mic runners on both sides of the room. So number 3. Wanna-
Thanks for the presentation. One question about memory forensics. Following your presentation, you didn't mention anything that would lead to defense techniques regarding memory forensics. Is that true?
Yes. Basically, everything is extracted, unfolded in the memory. So if you dig into the memory, then you have really clear view what it is actually.
So using volatility or recall should work in terms of detecting.
Yeah. So the thing is that it's not really using any traditional rootkit technique. They are using public APIs, all these techniques. It is not really easy to determine this one is malicious or not. So that is only problem. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Mic 4.
Thank you for the incredible presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
On the HTTPS interception, what is the name of the certificate, and can you use the sysinternals utility to dump all the certificates and check against the Microsoft and find this malicious
Yeah, so
certificate?
it was also mentioned in the the Bitdefender report too. It was secure network, or I don't remember the actual name. So it's just secure something. I can put them in the slide later.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Back to 3.
Thanks for a great presentation and analysis.
Yeah, thank you.
Back to the feature, then you can load the driver signed with the revoked certificate. Why? Maybe I missed that part, and I do understand the argument that we allow some old signed drivers for backward compatibility, but does the normal certificate validation process is not working in the kernel, so someone can load the driver with certificate revoked?
Yeah, so I'm not the best person who can actually answer those things, actually. So I'm more of security research, and that is one of the features that exists in Windows 10 for backward compatibility reasons. And there are a lot of different vendors. So there are some vendors doing this, the other vendors doing that. It's really hard to control what they are doing in many cases. And my basic understanding is that that is the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Mic 4.
Thank you for the great presentation. I actually have 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, this is a very complex piece of rootkit, so it's very unusual to be associated with a simple malware like ad malware. Have you noticed the from telemetry that is distributed much more complex malware? So that's the first question.
Much more complex what?
Like the ad malware, yeah. So they doing a lot of effort to
that is kind of really weird aspect of this malware, because it's doing really high-end, it's using a really high-end technique there. What they are doing is just injecting ads, actually. So,
yeah.
But what I focused on is these techniques they are using protecting against all the security products. So I didn't have much time to investigate whether there is any other activities it is doing. But I trust what Bitdefender found. But this technique, the point is that this technique can be used for like other operations too, possibly APT or like a more advanced attacks.
Okay.
So,
okay. So
I think this is a kind of a wake-up call for security vendors, actually. So they can be nullified, and they can be totally. They totally don't know about that for years. Yeah, that is possible because this one is just putting 2 bytes in the callbacks, and how can you know that you are actually tampered, actually, right? So that is one issue with a lot of security products.
Okay, so that leads us to the second question. Does Windows Defender ETB was in the list of the security product that the malware, the rootkit tried to kill its driver? And if it's in this list, how it protect itself from writing the driver entry?
Yeah, I don't believe it was on the list. But we have anti-tampering team in our group, actually. He's here. So we have a lot of ideas how we can detect these rootkit activities, actually.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Are there any questions online? Okay, Mag 3.
It's pretty great that WD-ATP was able to catch some of this stuff across from a kernel view. I'm just curious, at the beginning of the talk you said kind of the rise or the return of kernel mode rootkits. Other than this one instance in the telemetry of WD-ATP, are you guys seeing an increase in kernel mode activity and attack techniques across all of our tenants / across the fleet that WD-ATP is deployed on?
Yeah, so we see very interesting things happening from our client, but obviously we can't talk about it actually, right? So, but there are a lot of interesting things happens actually. So, yeah, that's what I can tell.
Well, let's thank our speaker again, and thank you
Yeah,
very much,
thank
Matt.
you.